Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 19th of March, 2025, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and joining me via video link today is Charles Mallett, Vanessa Beeley, and Sandy Adams. We're going to begin today with the UK regime's attack on the welfare system. Now, the Labour government has announced major cuts to the welfare system in the UK, and today they're publishing a green paper called Pathways to Work. The main focus of this announcement was on the disabled and long-term sick and getting them back into work. This is what they were trying to claim. It's all about getting them back into work. So they've announced they're going to spend £1 billion. That's £1 billion to do that. This is, they say, going to end years of inaction, government inaction, which has led to 1 in 8 young people not currently in work, education or training, and 2.8 million people economically inactive due to long-term sickness. And they say that this is one of the highest rates in the G7. Now, I think the first thing to note is that no one in the mainstream media, at least in their coverage of this, was wanting to speak about why there are so many people on disability benefits, because the fact is that that they're roughly double the number of people. So if we just bring this graph on screen and have a look at how this situation has changed since 2014-15. But around 2019, there were something around 200,000 people claiming PIP, this is Personal Independence Plan, payment, and by 2023, 2024, that was up to around 400,000. So a doubling in the last few years. The DWP has reinforced this graph by admitting that since the pandemic, so-called the number of working age people receiving PIP has more than doubled from 15,300 to 35,100 a month, and that the number of people aged 16 to 24 receiving PIP per month has also risen from, in this case, 2,967 to 7,857 a month. And they're saying that over the next 5 years, if no action is taken, they say the number of working age people claiming PIP is expected to increase from 2 million in 2021 to 4.3 million, costing 34.1 billion annually. But the question is, what do they mean by take no action? Do they mean if they don't simply cut the support? Or do they mean that they're going to do something to actually repair the damage done by the government policy that we've seen over the last several years? And never mention the jabs. But my question is, what's this really about? One thing that it isn't about is filling job vacancies, because the number of unfilled jobs has been falling now for 2.5 years. The estimated number of vacancies was 812,000 in the UK, according to the latest statistics from the ONS. That was between October and December 2024. Now, 812,000 might seem like a big number, but it isn't really. And it represents a decrease of 24,000 from the previous quarter. That's 2.9% fall, and a 12.7% fall from the previous year, same period the previous year. So the direction of travel is not good if hundreds of thousands of new people are going to be forced into the market, because there are already 1.9 people per vacancy before this change. But I think that actually the disabled here are effectively the poster children for something else that's going on. Certainly, part of this is about punishing anyone for whom lockdown and jabs had a major detrimental effect on their lives, but it's also, as I say, cover about something else. So here's an exchange from the debate yesterday in the House of Commons. This is Tory MP Mark Pritchard asking Liz Kendall. He had this to say.
Youth unemployment stood at 642,000 as of the last quarter of 2024, a rise of 136,000 on 2023, and a youth unemployment rate of 14.8%. She mentions earlier in her statement, earn and learn. Does she agree with me that one way of perhaps attracting some people back into work is for her to have discussions with her colleague in the Ministry of Defence, the Defence Secretary? And would she agree with me that getting more young people into His Majesty's Armed Forces, Air Force, Navy, Army, would be a starting place?
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman. Indeed, before I was appointed to this position in opposition as a constituency MP, I have discussed with my local job centre and the Armed Forces recruitment precisely these issues because of the really exciting careers and opportunities that are available. I think are really important for young people in my constituency and the one that he represents. And I will certainly be having more conversations with colleagues in the Ministry of Defence to make sure we put this plan into action.
So she's going to put this plan into action. What plan? What are the details? No one's talking about this plan. So maybe this is something everyone might like to write to their MP about and ask exactly what is the plan with the Ministry of Defence, which is going to be put in action. I think we know whether it's called conscription or national service, it is coming. And I think if we don't want our children and grandchildren involved, now is the time to take note and take action. Charles, any thoughts on that?
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, all. Yeah, well, I think my first thought is that the government have an amazing amount of control over the younger generation. First of all, like we see here, people who are claiming any sort of benefits are obviously financially dependent upon the government, so therefore can be pushed in any which way. But the other thing, looking at it the other way around, if we're to say this is a plan when quite clearly it isn't, but if we're talking about people who are willfully staying out of the workplace, either because they're unfit enough to enter it due to quite probable injuries from pharmaceutical products, or indeed the product of simply living a very unhealthy lifestyle from 2020, having been sort of interned. What sort of people are going to be fed into the armed forces? If they're not willingly coming forward, the bar would have to be lowered considerably in order that people got through whatever training is required. So the outcomes for anybody concerned would be absolutely terrible. But the euphemistic language previously described, of course, as economic inactivity, it is, there is an absolutely enormous disaster here below the surface, which is just not being dealt with at all. So exactly what do the government mean when they say they're talking about dealing with it exactly? I don't know.
Yes, indeed. Okay, well, just to finish this off then, I'll just bring this tweet on screen. Robert here saying, I'm 76 and worked since I was 16. Explain to me how the UK state pension is a benefit, because this is also part of these cuts. Where's the money I paid into it gone? You talk Ponzi scheme. I give you the UK government. I just want to say this is exactly the point that I've been trying to make for years now. State pension obligations for the UK state at the moment is £6.1 trillion. This is unpayable. So it is a Ponzi scheme, and there was only ever going to be a rolling back on the state pension scheme, whether that means increasing the pension age or reducing the pension. So we'll keep you posted on that as we move on. Vanessa, let me welcome you to the programme now. And of course, everybody talking about Donald Trump and the great peacemaker with his conversation with Putin yesterday. But what else has he been up to?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, he's so far fulfilling his mandate to bring a ceasefire to Ukraine. However, he's turning his attention to West Asia and in particular Iran on behalf of Israel. So this was something that Donald Trump tweeted out, I think yesterday. Hundreds of attacks being made by Houthi, which is of course known as Ansarullah, the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen, I mean, as if they're not Yemeni, and hated by the Yemeni people, in reality, of course, supported by the huge majority of the Yemeni people in their battle to end the occupation and oppression of Palestine, all emanate from and are created by Iran in capital letters. He then went on to add to this with further threats. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran, in capitals again, and Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire. Then basically, I think it's one of the spokespeople for the White House basically went on to Fox News to reiterate the message that Trump was putting out. So let's just play this extraordinary statement.
Well, the Trump administration and the White House were consulted by the Israelis on their attacks in Gaza tonight. And as President Trump has made it clear, Hamas, the Houthis, Iran, all those who seek to terrorize not just Israel, but also the United States of America will see a price to pay. All hell will break loose. And all of the terrorists in the Middle East, again, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iranian-backed terror proxies, and Iran themselves should take President Trump very seriously when he says he is not afraid to stand for law-abiding people. He is not afraid to stand up for the United States of America and our friend and our ally Israel.
I mean, this is just, I mean, Trump is effectively, apparently, declaring war on the entire resistance axis across the region from Palestine through to Iran. At the same time, in Israel, this statement was put out by Israel Katz. I called him the war minister of Israel. If Hamas doesn't release all the hostages, the gates of hell will open in Gaza and the murderers and rapists of Hamas will meet the IDF with forces they have never known before. Of course, we're back to the ceasefire shenanigans, which is never anything more than a theatrical play to effectively be used as a weapon to blame Hamas and to enable what is now happening, the violation of the ceasefire in Gaza and the continuation of the ethnic cleansing and genocide. And then again, Ben Gvir is announced to be rejoining the Netanyahu coalition, praising the mass killings carried out in Gaza in the last 48 hours with mass bombing. And then the statement by the Zionist IDF, or Israeli occupation forces, who said that they launched a strong offensive against, of course, they call them terror organizations. These designated areas are considered dangerous combat zones for your own safety, addressing the Palestinians sheltering in what's left of Gaza. You must evacuate immediately to known shelters in western Gaza City and in Khan Yunis. Of course, this is again forced displacement of people that have already been multiple times displaced. The Rafah crossing with Egypt is now closed to all medical cases looking to enter Egypt for hospital care or even to go abroad for medical treatment. So we're back to full-on genocide, while a number of Hamas resistance fighters were killed in the attack. I think it was 3 or 4. The majority of the victims, of course, were children yet again. Just a couple of photos from the aftermath of the attack itself the other day. And the headlines, even in Western media, I have to say, I didn't have to look very far. More than 400 Palestinians, I think the number is now around 462 in one attack, killed, and scores injured, now reaching close to an estimated 600 injured, of course, the majority children, in extensive Israeli airstrikes on Gaza. And this is a statement from Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan, who works for Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, in Gaza itself. She said immediately after, she described the horrors that she saw, and of course she's been there for much of the genocide in Gaza. There were probably 3 men. The rest were all children, women, and the elderly, everybody caught in their sleep, wrapped in their blankets. Terrifying. So she describes the fact that, again, the majority of the victims were disabled, elderly, innocent civilians, children and women that have been targeted since October the 7th. At the same time, of course, Trump has effectively, with the UK, started a new round of the war against Yemen, which began in March 2015. And in the initial strikes, around 50 Yemenis were killed, injured, in the US-UK aggression on Yemeni cities, which include the targeting of hospitals and cancer centers and schools. Yemen has retaliated. Harry S. Truman attacked for a second time within hours by various ballistic missiles and drones. And there are reports now that there have been 4 attacks on the USS Truman. At the same time, when we're talking about Trump launching what is effectively a regional war, Israel has been increasing its attacks on Syria, It bombed southern Syria a couple of days ago. In Daraa, there are convoys of Israeli troops and hardware coming into Syria for the last 48 hours. And yesterday they bombed what they described as a missile battalion in Homs in Syria. So on the border, very close to the border with Lebanon, and I'll come on to that next if we have a quick look at the map. We talked about this previously, just to keep the map on screen. The red circle shows the area on the Syrian-Lebanese border, which was attacked, I think, about a month ago. We talked about it on UK Column, by the HTS al-Qaeda forces who were driven back by the tribesmen and the clans in this area. There has been a more concerted attack in the last few days by HTS forces. There's now a sort of a semi-ceasefire, but they were again driven back by the tribesmen, and now the Lebanese army forces are on the border with heavy artillery to force back the Syrian terrorist attack. I won't call them Syrian, actually, because the majority of them are foreign mercenaries. So, and at the same time, Israel was actually bombing the Lebanese side on behalf of Jolani's forces. Israel has been bombing southern Lebanon, corresponding with the attack by HTS. So it becomes very clear that Israel is trying to open two fronts against Hezbollah in Lebanon, using HTS or al-Qaeda as a proxy in the northeast, and attacking directly in the south, while, of course, disrupting and destabilizing Syria, and while al-Qaeda is continuing with the massacres of the ethnic minorities inside Syria. So it appears to be very clear that Trump, while, let's say, ending the war in Ukraine in agreement with Putin, is now focusing very much on West Asia, with Iran, one assumes, as the final target.
Thank you very much for that, Vanessa. We'll have more international news later on, but let's come back to the UK first. And Charles, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about GB Energy. That must be going very well, surely?
Well, I think we can probably qualify that. Yes, we'll look at Great British Energy, and this is something UK Column has talked about even back at its inception last year, 2024. Spoiler alert, it is not great. It's not really particularly British, and there is going to be very little in the way of energy. But the reason it's in the news today is that there has been a report from the Institute for Public Policy Research, which relates back to the Labour Party manifesto of 2024. So right away, we are stuck in the zone of net zero being absolutely ideological rather more than anything else. And in the manifesto, they said that they were going to turn the page decisively on the conservative ideas that have caused chaos in order that they can take ownership of the chaos themselves. The proposal is that this is pushed on by £8.3 billion worth of investment, which can only be said to secure perhaps 5% of the total energy requirement following the year 2030. So that's an absolutely paltry amount of electricity to be generating. At 1 minute past midnight this morning, they were meant to publish the full report, but like all things connected to net zero, that didn't work. And we'll then take a look at the chief executive just to see the sorts of alignments we're considering here, run by a chap called Jürgen Meyer, who is also running the digital Catapult here, accelerating the digital future. And of course, because we know now from the National Energy System Operator that all energy is really to be diverted towards artificial intelligence and control of our lives in order that we surrender our own requirement for energy. This is entirely in keeping with the direction of travel. Now, this, of course, provides an opportunity for political opportunism, and this is where the leader of the opposition has jumped in, receiving a certain amount of criticism, but of course, it's all very theatrical. Kemi Badenoch here taking flack for saying that we're now going to be dependent upon China, which has instantly meant that she's been fact-checked by Carbon Brief. Now, the moment you start telling lies about this sort of stuff, you are definitely going to get caught out. So the irony being that last year, the IPPR produced a paper written by the same man who's produced today's report, Simon Gasperin, produced a document called Second Wind, in which they said, to meet global net zero 2030 targets, the world's wind manufacturing annual capacity will have to increase to 350 gigawatts, which is a significant increase on where we are now. I know these figures are slightly meaningless, but the point is, it needs to be ramped up dramatically. And the report went on to say that China is the global wind superpower. China accounts for 3/5 of the world's capacity in wind nacelles and blades, and accounts for the overwhelming majority of mining and refining of essential rare earth minerals. So Badnoch might be right, but of course, is China a threat or not? And is one to take the Richard Dearlove line or not? So this absurd line being walked when it concerns net zero, which, as I say, of course, is an ideological commitment rather than anything else. Now, what I'll do is I'll just set in context what this means in terms of energy. This is taken from Energy Dashboard Live at 6 o'clock this morning. The overall picture of energy on the left there. Now, I'm putting a red arrow down onto the renewable contribution, which was only just over 9% this morning because the sun hadn't yet got up and it wasn't really blowing much in the way of wind. What is worth drawing your attention to is the box just to its right, which I've ringed there in red, because that is the total contribution from imports and nuclear, which amounts to just over 8.5 gigawatts of energy, which is what Great British Energy is supposed to recover from an £8.3 billion investment. Now, is it worth it if the sun's not going to shine and the wind's not going to blow? I will leave you to answer that question yourself. And now on the right, we see what's called the carbon intensity. So even if all of this stuff works, and we do get, by some miracle, 5% of renewable energy, if you turn the gas on, then you're destroying your fiction of net zero, because of course you're straight into the zone of what they call high carbon intensity. Now, just to give an indication of the direction this dreadful scam is going, the Alpha Ventus offshore wind capability that Germany had set up 15 years ago is now going to be closed because it cannot be profitable because the subsidy has dried up, which just reinforces the point. This is absolutely a totally and utterly failed policy. And just to contextualize the requirements by space for all of these various technologies, we'll just look at the Nuclear Energy Institute, which shows here with a graphic, which I'll describe, the acreage taken up in order to produce 1 million megawatt hours. Now, to produce 1 million megawatt hours, nuclear would require 103 acres, solar would require 3,200 acres, and wind would require a whopping 17,800 acres. So we talked a lot on this programme about the stealing of agricultural land in particular, but land that belongs really in the natural world being completely destroyed by the so-called renewable technology. Now, last week I spoke about a food and farming symposium that was going to take place in Cheltenham at the weekend, which it duly did, and it was a great success. Sandy was there too, and very pleasingly, this has been reported by the Stroud News and Journal, an article put in by Kay Devine, so we see this on screen. And it's worth noting that there were two members of Parliament there, one pictured here standing next to a UK column journalist, and here's Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown, the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, which of course is significant because he has recently audited the absurd carbon capture scheme and highlighted the incredible inefficiencies of that particular technology. But within the article, I'd just like to draw out the following text, which is how it concluded, which is that supranational and unaccountable influence over the food supply via the UN's Sustainable Development Goals and the Davos influence is something that those present expressed their determination to challenge and resist. So I think to have it on record that a sitting member of Parliament, and indeed one who chairs the Public Accounts Committee, was present at such an event is significant. It means that this is being heard, and it really cannot be hidden that this net zero agenda fails at every turn. It is absolutely becoming more and more of public concern. So of course now it's over to people to keep the pressure on, particularly where it concerns the utter waste of taxpayer money, as indeed we see with this absurd idea for Great British Energy.
Charles, thank you very much for that. Let's come on to now, Sandy. Charles talking about 2030 as a deadline. Undoubtedly, what you're about to report here is also related to the year 2030 as well. And later on, we're going to be talking about European defence, and it's also becoming related to 2030. So 2030, massively significant year. But what's been going on in Bristol?
Well, the residents of Barton Hill, East Bristol, got a bit of a shock last week. An overnight police operation took place in Bristol to finish installing a controversial livable neighbourhood scheme. The council and its contractors, I think they're called ETM, and Avon and Somerset Police, arrived at Barton Hill at approximately 3 a.m. in the morning on Thursday, the 13th of March, to install planters, bus gate signs and paint roads as part of the East Bristol Livable Neighbourhood Scheme. The installations took place in multiple locations at the same time. Protesters arrived between 4 and 5 a.m. to attempt to stop these works, but only succeeded in stopping the instalment of one bus gate at the junction of Marsh Lane and Avondale Road, where a group of women actually laid down in the road to halt the contractors. As work was abandoned at this gate, the final E left on gate, bus gate, was not completed. So they did actually, at least stop something. Now, this scheme attempts to reduce traffic in parts of Barton Hill, Lawrence Hill, Redfield and St George by closing off side roads to cars and creating a series of no-through roads, dead ends and cul-de-sacs, whilst allowing pedestrians and cyclists to go through. However, many locals in the area of Bristol have said it's made life really difficult for them, with some saying car journeys have doubled or tripled in length because of congestion. I mean, we've seen this in other areas. This time, this nightmare, we've seen it in all these other cities. Contractors were supported by 28 Avon and Somerset police officers and a police drone operator team. By morning, planters, road blockages and bus gates were installed across the area, including 2 locations, other locations in East Bristol. Officers and contractors left the scene at around 6 a.m. Now, Avon and Somerset police confirmed that 28 officers did attend with drone support, and they said that they had they were sort of trying to calm the protesters. They said they'd held back a few demonstrators. Now, there's a cafe owner who said that she was not told about this. She said her business would suffer if the closure of the road happened. And she said that there was nothing about bus gates, nothing about road closures, not a single time did they mention it. Now, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Avon and Somerset Police, Claire Moody, has said she'll look into the heavy police presence at the protest. And she said, I obviously have a scrutiny role around policing, so I just want to acknowledge that it's something I'm aware of. The number of police involved, it's something I'm investigating and it's something I'll be following up. Meanwhile, the Green leader of the council, Tony Dyer, said, I think it's very clear there are some very strong feelings about this process. We do take those seriously. Well, I wonder. What we have to remember is that Bristol is a combined authority, WECA, the West of England Combined Authority. With the new directly elected mayoral elections on May the 1st, this will drive the people further away from any decision-making process. And what's deeply concerning is that the assault on the community has not undergone any democratic process, despite strong opposition. This is a classic example of what we can expect when these smart city mayors are in power. The fact that the Police and Crime Commissioner said she will investigate the heavy-handed approach of the police in this incident is ironic. Her position as Police and Crime Commissioner will not exist in the future. According to the Cities and Communities Act of 2016 and the Devolution White Paper of 2025, the powers of the Police and Crime Commissioners will be given over to the mayors for climate and energy in the combined authorities, along with all the powers currently held by Westminster. This begs the question, really, where will this leave the people of the UK with their freedom of movement and rights to go about their business trampled on? It's nothing short of fascism, in my view. Devolution is set to cost the taxpayer over 400 million. So let's look at what the devolution means straight from the devolution white paper, and Angela Rayner has quoted, "We will give mayors strong powers over housing, planning, transport, energy, skills and employment, backed up with consolidated funding. Devolution will no longer be agreed at the whim of a minister in Whitehall." And Jim McMahon, he was quoted as saying, "This white paper initiates the biggest transfer of power out of Westminster to English regions this century." He also, he also did mention another quote in the summary of the devolution white paper, which I found interesting. He said, "This is ambitious, but it's not new. This programme of reform continues the work of the 1997 governments onwards, which saw the formation of the Mayor of London, devolved parliaments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and freedoms for local government with the creation of combined authorities, the power of economic, social and environmental well-being." Well, what he's really saying is it's the continuation of Tony Blair's legacy of devolution from 1997, which ended up with Northern Ireland in the Good Friday Agreement, in my view. He speaks of economic, social and environmental well-being. And I think what he really means is ESG, environmental and social governance. So that's my report from Bristol.
But the key point here is, Sandy, that lots of people will look at devolution and they'll think, well, this is a great thing. It's taking power away from these idiots in Westminster who are, clearly incapable of using it properly. It's bringing it to the local level. We will have more of a say in what happens at a local level. But in fact, it's quite the opposite, because we're just replacing a prime minister with an elected mayor who may be elected, but in fact is ideologically aligned with more global interests, and they have the election for the mayor sewn up just as tightly as they have for Westminster. So we will end up with someone who is basically untouchable.
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. It's a Trojan horse to actually remove the powers from Westminster to destroy our representation of government, even if they are. I mean, yes, they're not good, but at least, you do have some sort of say. But with this lot, you won't have any say at all.
Yes. Sandy, thank you very much for that. Okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK Column does and you'd like to support us, the place to go is support.ukcolumn.org. There's a link from the front page of the UK Column website, and you can support us by making a donation or joining as a member. And if you do join as a member, that of course entitles you to get access to UK Column News Extra and other material, and forums and so on. You can pick something up from the UK Column shop. Or if you buy something using this link from clive2carl.com, then we will get a small commission from anything from anything that you buy from them. But if you can't do that, please do share the material you find on the UK Column website in particular, and we do provide share links for that. If you can do that, that would be fantastic. Another reminder of UK Column on location. I think there are less than 50 tickets left now, I think something like that at the moment. So if you are able to come along for that, please do. Catherine Gunn, Alex Thompson, Patrick Henningsen, Raja Mia talking at that. But at that, Brian Garish will also be speaking. Now, tomorrow at 1 p.m, then Brian is going to be speaking to filmmaker Chris Burgard, who was present at Capitol Hill on the day that Biden and the media screamed rioters held a dagger to the throat of America and American democracy. Now, his documentaries tell a different story. And if you'd like to know more about that, join us at 1 p.m. tomorrow. The interview that went out at 1 p.m. yesterday, Charles, was with Liz Evans.
It was, yes, and I really recommend listening to it. It's a very candid account of her journey, first of all, into the NHS and the incredibly constrained thinking that she encountered there, and then back out into complementary medicine, but also particularly her focus now being on medical ethics and indeed the harms from the COVID vaccine. So very much worth listening to.
And Liz will be joining us on the news on Friday. So please join us at 1 p.m. if you want to hear more from her. And then, Charles, the Food Finders Hub.
Yes, indeed. This was the sort of fallout and follow-up action from the symposium that I referred to on Sunday, launched by Mark Byford, who spoke very well about it. This is a way of connecting producers of food with the consumer in a really, really direct way. So please do take a look at this. The link will be in the show notes. It's not to say that everything has to go through the Food Finders Hub, but it's really just to understand the concept of dealing directly with farmers and the producers of food and cutting out all the influences that turn things bad.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charles. Now, let's move on then to European defence. And, well, Ursula von der Leyen is frankly off her head. I mean, really insane, actually. So allow me to demonstrate. Yesterday, she was speaking to military cadets in Denmark about the future of war in Europe. And she announced what she called Readiness 2030, because 2030, as we've mentioned already, is a key deadline year for everyone. So she announced 4 priorities for Readiness 2030, a surge in defence spending with up to 800 billion euros. We talked about that over the last couple of weeks. This is her plan. And then we've got pan-European cooperation was the next thing she was talking. That includes military mobility, which is what they describe as a functioning EU-wide network of land corridors, airports and seaports to facilitate the fast transportation of troops and military equipment. They don't call it this, but let's call it the Russian front, because that's what it's all about. They're talking about, or she's talking about what she's calling a porcupine strategy for Ukraine, whatever that means. And maybe she means it's going to be so bristling with missiles that it's dangerous to touch it or something. She talked about setting up a joint task force with Ukraine. And finally, she talked about the other feature of European Defence Union that we've been talking about for a long time, which was an EU-wide market for defence equipment and a single point procurement process. So this is the defence union that we've been warning about for 15 years, and the war danger that comes with it is absolutely there for everyone to see. So how was she justifying this? Well, first of all, she had something to say about Greenland. Let's have a listen.
Europe must get ready for war. I'm, of course, talking about the ongoing war in Ukraine and conflicts in other theaters, but also the repeated and continued attacks on critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. And, of course, the ongoing competition for influence in the Arctic region, including Greenland. And to all the people of Greenland and of Denmark as a whole, I want to be very clear that Europe will always stand for sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Sovereignty and territorial integrity was something they were talking about with respect to Ukraine. Now they're talking about with respect to Greenland. Is their intention to seriously, face off against the United States? I don't know, but this is unhinged language that she's using. She went on to talk about Trump's desire to reorient to China.
Just take Russia. We already know its determination to deny other countries their right to choose their own path. And now Russia is on an irreversible path to creating a pure war economy. It has massively expanded its military-industrial production capacity. 40% of the federal budget is spent on defense, 9% of its GDP. And this investment fuels its war of aggression in Ukraine while preparing it for future confrontation with European democracies. And just as these threats increase, we see our oldest partner, the United States, move their focus to the Indo-Pacific.
So we're going to talk about this much, much more in Extra, I'm quite sure. But let's just listen to a final clip, because she's absolutely determined. I mean, obviously what Trump is doing here is justifying this move towards military integration in Europe. Let's listen to why her comments about when the European Union should act.
The point is that we must see the world as it is, and we must act immediately to face up to it, because a new international order will be formed in the second half of this decade and beyond. So as we stand here today, Europe faces a fundamental choice about its future. Do we keep reacting to each challenge in an incremental and cautious way? Or are we ready to grasp this opportunity to build a more secure Europe, one that is prosperous, free and ready, willing and able to defend itself? Dear cadets, the answer is clear. The choice is none. Europe is ready to step up, We are ready to take control of the change that is inevitable, because we cannot afford to be pushed around by history. And that means acting now is a must.
So we've got to act now. Now, just to clarify, the jump cuts that were in those 3 video clips, I wasn't cutting any words out of that. I was cutting out silences. So it was just to slightly compress the time that she said those words, but the words were in the order that she gave them. But in the meantime, as we've been reporting for a couple of weeks, and Jobs was reporting on this again on Monday, Germany has been subverting its own constitution in order to enable Starmer and von der Leyen to enable their war policy. Well, yesterday it actually did it. So a 2/3 majority in the Bundestag voted to allow these huge increases in defense and infrastructure spending. And this, of course, is going to exempt spending on war from Germany's otherwise strict debt rules. And it's going to create out of nothing something like 500 billion euros of a war fund. The question now, or the question of whether to go ahead with this, now moves to the upper house, the Bundesrat, which needs to approve the deal also by a 2/3 majority before it actually becomes law. And that vote is going to happen on Friday. But as Patrick has been reporting, the incoming Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, proposed these measures immediately following his election win in a 180-degree reversal of the policy he campaigned on. So, this is wrong in so many levels, as far as I can see. But finally, on this topic for now, Kaja Kallas, who is the equivalent of the EU foreign minister, the special representative, was in the UK this week to meet with John Healey, who's the Secretary of State for War, and David Lammy, who's the Foreign Secretary. Let's listen to what Healey and Kallas had to say.
Kaya, welcome. This is a time when the demands of the moment mean European partners must come together, recognising the NATO as our cornerstone of European security, but we need to do more. You in the Commission and the European Union are stepping up just as we are in the UK. We must step up together on European security, on defence spending, and on reinforcing our industrial bases.
And to add to that, it is more defence spending. How can we do more, but also how we can spend the money more cleverly? I mean, the new technologies, what could be their innovation and capabilities that we can develop further so that we could have European security in really strong hands.
Exactly so, and I think we can learn from what we have been involved in with supporting Ukraine, can't we? We need our European defence industries to be able to innovate at a wartime pace. We need to make sure that what we spend on defence also drives economic growth.
Exactly.
But on Ukraine now is also the time when we must maintain our strong support for Ukraine. We must not jeopardise the peace by forgetting about the war, and we will together reinforce our efforts to secure that peace.
Because European security starts with Ukraine right now, and that's why we need to support them to be able to defend themselves. So thank you very much for these discussions.
Thank you.
Vanessa, these people are off their heads.
That wasn't scripted at all. I mean, just listening to them is like I'm in the Truman Show or something. It's so disconnected from reality. It's quite incredible. Sorry, I'm a bit speechless actually on this one.
Yeah, well, move on with it because we've got more here from you on UK and EU cooperation.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, people will remember back in January, just after the international coup finally toppled the Syrian government and replaced it with Al-Qaeda. So Lamy was then saying that he discussed the importance of an inclusive political transition and regional security with interim Syrian Foreign Minister Assad Shaibani. The UK will support Syria's long-term stability through humanitarian aid and coordination. Of course, they didn't. They basically destabilized Syria to the maximum from about 2009 onwards. But let's look fast forward to 17th of March. UK pledges up to 116 million to support Syria's recovery and stability in post-Assad era. The UK government has pledged 160 million in aid. I always put that in inverted commas, to help stabilize, should also be in inverted commas, Syria following the fall of the Syrian government. Let's have a look at what the actual Minister for the Middle East, Hamish Falconer, said. UK aid delivered through trusted UN and NGO partners will provide life-saving support for Syrians, including refugees across the region. Of course, Mike, we know who those trusted NGOs are, predominantly the White Helmets. We also know that there will be zero transparency about that 160 million add to the previous millions, if not billions, that the UK has sent to support basically Al-Qaeda and their White Helmet helpers and all other NGOs associated with Al-Qaeda in Syria. And then this is quite interesting. This was on the 6th of March, an update on Syria, lifting asset freezes on 24 entities, which includes the Syrian airlines, the Syrian central bank. But interesting that they're maintaining sanctions on the Assad family because of their alleged links to the Captagon drug trade in Syria that we've covered quite a few times on UK Column and debunked, particularly a BBC documentary accusing former President Assad of being the head of the Captagon trade. And interesting that there have been a number of arrests recently of drug smugglers in Syria. So despite President Assad no longer being present, the most recent one, Iraq's Interior Ministry announced Sunday the seizure of 1.1 tons of Captagon and the arrest of a major cross-border drug network in coordination with Erbil and Soleimani counter-narcotic units. Authorities tracked a truck going from Syria via Turkey. So one assumes it's going from Idlib, which was previously under the control of Jolani, who's now the unelected, self-proclaimed president in Damascus. And it is one of the Iraq's largest drug busts. So a few questions to be raised over, one, the reason for the sanctions, and two, the propaganda regarding the Captagon production in Syria. And then we move on back to Brussels and von der Leyen and the whole team there. This is a standing with Syria donor conference in Brussels that ended, I think, a couple of days ago. And who was invited? The interim foreign minister, who, of course, was previously Al-Qaeda. I know that we've mentioned this before. He was actually a founder of Al-Qaeda in Syria, named back in December as a caretaker foreign minister. I know I keep repeating this, but I do think it's quite important. And here is a picture of him on the right or left, depending on how you're looking at it. I think that was at the WEF in Davos, and on the left as an acting Al-Qaeda and formerly ISIS member carrying out atrocities against Syrian civilians. And of course, he did meet Kaya Khalas, sorry, I'm putting on the Arabic accent there, bilateral meeting between Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani and EU High Representative Kaya Kallas on the sidelines of the Brussels donor conference on Syria. So again, the EU and their various representatives embracing Al-Qaeda members in Brussels. And of course, they're also upping the ante in their funding for Syria. The EU and its partners, Kaya Kallas says, just pledged 5.8 billion for Syria and its neighbors. This will support Syria at a crucial time of transition and address the dire needs on the ground. This is a chance for the people of Syria to seize the moment and shape their own destiny. But I just want to move on to Assad Shaibani's actual speech that he made, where again he was basically reiterating the propaganda that has sustained the regime change war for the UK, the EU, and the US against Syria since 2011, that it was all the fault of the minorities and President Assad. He states that the age of tyranny is over. We have sworn an oath to our people that the age of oppression has passed and will not return. And he goes on, he says, and as is the case now, I've put in brackets there, the unelected Al-Qaeda Syrian government remains the sole guarantor of civil peace. Well, really? I mean, last week we talked about the ethnic cleansing and the effect of genocide that's being conducted by HTS and its various foreign mercenary, fanatical, extremist, terrorist groups. against the people in the coastal area, particularly Christians and Alawites, but even against Sunni Muslims who are protesting massacres of Syrian Alawites. So I just want to play this video of a lady who was being interviewed in Jable on the coastal area in Syria.
بيعمتك
أهلي أمي إخوالي رفقاتي حارتي الجيران أنا خايفة على الكل حرام في عالم ما زنبط والله في عالم ما زنبط
من وين أنت؟
أنا من جبلة جارنا تحت بيتنا فتح الباب قال لهم فوتوا فتشوا وصوا قدام مرته بناته طفلتين صغار اسمه حسام حبيب.
The massacres are continuing. Houses, apartments, shops are being looted and burned. And there is now talk of displacing all of the Alawite civilians and replacing them with Sunni Muslim extremist factions to actually sort of reconstitute that area of Syria. And I just wanted to quickly show this rather than another execution video. This is a kid in Al-Bab, Aleppo, being given a semi-automatic, I think it is, by an HTS fighter. This is how the children in Syria are being indoctrinated. So I would also ask, when do the UK or EU pledge money to actually alleviate the problems in the target countries?
Yeah, good question, Vanessa. Good question. Thank you for that. And Sandy, sticking with EU and UK, Nigel Farage is pretty silent on this, but what's going on with respect to our potential rejoining?
Well, Keir Starmer, as we know, has been strengthening ties with EU without allegedly reversing Brexit. I mean, he's proposing an EU security pact, UK-EU security pact with the collaboration on defence and intelligence matters, aiming to bolster NATO, all that kind of thing, stuff that we've been talking about. He's now in May, on May the 19th, 2025, he's hosting an EU leaders for post-Brexit summit. And this is the first summit, obviously, since Brexit, to explore avenues for deeper cooperation and to reset relations between the UK and the EU. Engaging in bilateral talks with with key EU nations. He's engaged in discussions with leaders like German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron to negotiate bilateral agreements focusing on defence, energy security and scientific collaboration. So he's advocating for closer economic ties whilst apparently ruling out rejoining the EU. And he seeks to improve economic relations by addressing trade barriers and all that, the recognition of agreements to facilitate smoother trade between the UK and the EU member states. Without allegedly reversing Brexit. But yesterday, on Monday, this was published on Monday from the House of Commons Library, that on Monday, the 25th of March at 4:30, there'll be a debate in Westminster Hall on e-petition 700005 on applying to join the EU. The debate will be led by Paul Davis MP. So, as we all thought, Starmer is, he's determined to reverse Brexit and debate on us rejoining.
Yes, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, really. But yes, I believe that's what's happening. So, Charles, let's come back to you then. And what's going on with the police?
Well, as ever, never quite the right thing. And we have our attention drawn to this by the tribunal that's been going on in Croydon last week, shown here by Sex Matters, who have described it as the tribunal concerning particularly they're reporting on the anonymity of a witness. Now, that's not actually specifically what I want to go into, but this concerns Melanie Newman, a Metropolitan Police Service employee who submitted a statement of evidence that goes back to 2023. And I think this really just lays bare the intentional destruction of the public services, which I'll go on to qualify. Now, she was in 2023 signed up for what's called a Transgender Day of Visibility. And in her statement, she makes the following she describes what it is that she thought in the workplace, and she is very explicit in her beliefs. She says, "I have gender critical beliefs, by which I mean that I know there are two sexes with immutable biological differences between them. I believe sex segregation and recording is essential in some circumstances to ensure female safety and equal opportunity, in much the same way that people are routinely segregated and classified by age." So it's important to note she's giving the policing context there. And she goes on to say, "I view this classification as particularly important in the criminal justice sphere. Males, irrespective of self-identification, make up the vast majority of violent and sexual crime suspects, defendants, and convicted offenders." She also went on to say that she believes very much in freedom of speech and expression, which presumably can't have endeared her to the Metropolitan Police Service or perhaps the tribunal itself. But the point really in all of this is that it teases out the fact that really what we're dealing with is an ideology and nothing to do with the way in which a police service should be able to conduct itself. And just to go on to give a flavour of what happened during this training, there were two trans activists there speaking. One, I might get the name wrong, it might be Shea Coffee, reposted a video on Twitter of Posey Parker being assaulted at a Let Women Speak event in New Zealand with a caption saying this was hilarious. And another one called Eva Echo, who spoke in hyperbolic terms about a need to save trans people from gender critical people with, quote, warped, twisted views, end quote, but never identified the nature of the risk. He advised on how to dismiss concerns about trans women in female-only spaces and spoke about the government and media in a conspiratorial manner. Now, I think really one thing that's come out of the tribunal, we're yet to see the full transcript, so it's hard to know exactly which way it would have gone and what the significance is, but certainly a senior police officer there speaking at the tribunal wouldn't even commit to saying that there was an identifiable link between the male sex and violent crime. So that is the degree to which the police psyche and modus operandi has been infected by this kind of ideology. And I would say that this points back to the Equality Act 2010, which is now to be seen to be doing that which it was intended for, which is really to create division, confusion, the breakdown of the family unit, and particularly hypocrisy and contradiction in both law and the workplace. And I think really what this comes to is the use of the positive action as enabled by sections 158 and 159 of the Equality Act, which are contextualized by this phrase, which is participation in an activity by persons who share a protected characteristic that is disproportionately low. So although it's an absurd example, this means that you could manipulate the situation in order to justify, for example, putting more pregnant women into frontline soldiering, because of course they would be represented in a disproportionately low fashion. So once you've done that manipulation, it allows you to go over anything, regardless of whether it's appropriate or suitable or even desirable by the people who are looking for employment, into a position where, as an employer, you can treat a person more favourably in connection with recruitment or promotion than another person, because person A has the protected characteristic, but person B does not. And so with that in mind, we should look at this lady here, Emma Dunn, who is the chair of Agender, which is spelled A:, and then gender, but of course it is an Agenda, and in her profile there, it describes her as being the chair of Agenda, the cross-government network supporting trans and intersex staff across government. Emma is intersex and identifies as female. Her pronouns are she, her, or they, them. Most confusing, but the point is this organisation, Agenda, it sits within central government. And given what I've just said about the Equality Act and the clauses that enable positive action and the way in which the Metropolitan Police Service has treated its own employees with regard to indoctrination around, in this case, gender issues and indeed the protected characteristics part of it, it's very hard to see how the government itself is not weaponising the Equality Act in order to unlawfully positively discriminate in order to pursue this ideology. Now, obviously, if anything significant is to come out of the results of the tribunal, then I'll report back on that. But I think this gives a very good insight into the incredibly corrosive influences that are attacking police from all sides and in a completely intentional manner.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. We're just going to end then with this. But well, on Friday, I was talking about the fact that Elon Musk and the US in the US is running his Doge operation to cut bureaucracy right across the federal government. And just a few weeks later, as I mentioned on Friday, Starmer had announced effectively the same policy with the NHS England, the first to fall. Here's the next effort then, because they're cutting government waste apparently, and they're going to cut up a bunch of credit cards. 20,000 credit cards so far is what they're intending to cut up, or at least freeze them so they can't be used. And then they're going to make anyone that wants to use a credit card in the civil service that I'm talking about here, they're going to make them reapply for their credit card. So according to the Cabinet Office, who's behind this great innovation, their aim is to reduce the number of active cards to around 10,000. They haven't been able to give the quality reports of outrageous spending that Musk was able to do. And the examples they gave then weren't talking about millions or hundreds of thousands even. They spoke about £1,200 spent on luxury coffee pods by one team in 2 months and £1,800 on a, quote, value for money course. Absolutely shocking. So rest assured, as the Prime Minister set out last week, he will be making sure that every pound spent delivers for us. What a nice man. I'm not sure what it's intending to deliver. Perhaps missiles on our heads is where we're heading. But we'll talk more about that in Extra as well. We've got to end there. I'm going to say thank you very much to Vanessa, Charles and Sandy for joining us today. Thank you for joining us. Stick around for UK Column for some Extra. We'll see you in a few minutes. Otherwise, enjoy the interview at 1 p.m. tomorrow, and we'll see you on Friday. Bye-bye.